Greetings and salutations. The beast has just settled into place. And, I don't know what the weather is like for the rest of you, but it has been actively snowing all day here and has thoroughly reburied my car. Hello, Meg Sampson. I see you've been doing the social media thing, and all right, well, thank you very much. We'll see what happens. The effort is certainly appreciated. Hello, Christina and Claire Bear, Kelsey Blaine Gibson. Hello, Terry, Svetlana, Dari. Dari's going back to work, at least partly, in person this week, as I understand it. And, Ruth, I'm sorry to hear you've been sick. And on her birthday week, too. It's Friday, right? Is your birthday this coming Friday? Hello, Michelle Vanderpool. Well, I hope everyone has... Hello, Emily Thatcher. My mom is here. Hi, Mom. Melissa Catano. Anna. I hope everyone has popcorn, tea, whiskey, whatever it is that you do. Julie has good weather. Oh, message retracted. It was 51 in Orange County. Hey, Malika. Hello. Don Emery. 52 in Irvine. Okay, so you're in no danger of snow down there. Got a couple of stories for you all this evening that are charming for completely different reasons. One of the early one of the early Fireside tales. Wow, what show is this? Wolfus, where are we? One of the early Fireside tales that diverged from Edgar Allan Poe delved into H.H. Munro, who wrote under the name Saki. And I've got another one for you that, enough preamble. They are very... they're appealing for completely different reasons. Thought we'd open this evening with a poem from Robert Burns. This is called A Red, Red Rose. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. So fair art thou, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I. And I will love thee still, my dear, until the seas gan dry. Till all the seas gone dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. I will love thee still, my dear, when the sands of life shall run. And fare thee weel, my only love, and fare thee weel a while. And I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile. Sounds like a Pretender song at the end. What was it Meg thought of as big dogs? Are you all talking about coyotes? I can't see the canid that has... Oh, we still have a bear in the neighborhood. Okay. Yeah, indeed. Hi, Charity. Thank you. I'm glad Emily just got off to work. That's glad you joined us. I I was in the chat when you first mistyped that, and I can't even remember now if it was my show or if I was in the chat and it was another show that we were all watching. It's all live to you on Vaudacity. I just remember when you said it for the first time. I think it was the picnic. Yes, Christina thinks it was the picnic. I suspect it was indeed. This next poem, I'm going to do one more before we get into the short story by Saki. Let me know what you think of this poem. I'm really curious to know what you think of the overall theme, substance, the statement that this poem makes. Obviously, it's well written. That would be the first criteria to just axe it all together. This is Love One Another by Khalil Gibran. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone. Even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow. I'm not sure what to make of that. It's like, love each other and be close, but not so close that you inadvertently suppress your partner. I'm just not sure what to take away from that. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Claire Bear is gonna curl up with her kitty Alice. That's lovely. Right, Charity. Unity in spreading love to everyone, but don't rely on any one person's love to stand on. That's interesting. Melissa, I'm not sure what that was originally published from, but Khalil Gibran. Let's see. Oh, I just tossed out of reach the. I just tossed out of reach the page that I had his biographical dates on. Is everything okay with the sound? That's an important question. I'm not sure if that's a tiny echo or tinny echo, or if I should or shouldn't adjust that. So, okay, sounds great. Thank you. Cool. The aforementioned Saki, his actual name was H.H. Monroe, and he passed in 1916, and I think I've described him on this show as being just painfully British. He wrote several books. Just enough reverb. Good to know. He wrote several books, but several of them are collections of short stories. And one of them, hello, Diana. One of the books is called The Chronicles of Clovis from 1911. And I believe I've read a couple of things to you all from The Chronicles of Clovis so far, if memory serves. This is The Stampeding of Lady Bastable from The Chronicles of Clovis by Saki. It would be rather nice if you would put up Clovis for another 6 days while I go up north to the McGregors, said Mrs. Sangrel, sleepily across the breakfast table. It was her invariable plan to speak in a sleepy, comfortable voice whenever she was unusually keen about anything. It put people off their guard, you see, and they frequently fell in with her wishes before they had realized that she was really asking for anything. Lady Bastable, however, was not so easily taken unawares. Possibly, she knew that voice and what it betokened. At any rate, she knew Clovis. She frowned at a piece of toast and ate it very slowly, as though she wished to convey the impression that the process hurt her more than it hurt the toast, but no extension of hospitality on Clovis's behalf rose to her lips. "It would be a great convenience to me," pursued Mrs. Sangrail, abandoning the careless tone. "I particularly don't want to take him to the McGregors, and it will only be for 6 days." "It will seem longer," said Lady Bastable dismally. "The last time he stayed here for a week—" "I know," interrupted the other hastily, "but that was nearly 2 years ago. He was younger then." "But he hasn't improved," said her hostess. "It's no use growing older if you only learn new ways of misbehaving yourself." Mrs. Sangrail was unable to argue the point. Since Clovis had reached the age of 17, she had never ceased to bewail his irrepressible waywardness to all her circle of acquaintances, and a polite skepticism would have greeted the slightest hint of a prospective reformation. She discarded the fruitless effort at cajolery and resorted to undisguised bribery. "If you'll have him here for these 6 days, I'll cancel that outstanding bridge account." It was only for 49 shillings, but Lady Bastable loved shillings with a great, strong love. To lose money at bridge and not to have to pay it was one of those rare expenses which gave the card table a glamour in her eyes which it could never otherwise have possessed. Mrs. Sangrail was almost equally devoted to her card winnings, but the prospect of conveniently warehousing her offspring for 6 days and, incidentally, saving his railway fare to the north reconciled her to the sacrifice. When Clovis made a belated appearance at the breakfast table, the bargain had been struck. "Just think," said Mrs. Sangrail sleepily. "Lady Bastable has been very kind and asked you to stay on here while I go to the McGregors." Clovis said suitable things in a highly unsuitable manner, and proceeded to make punitive expeditions among the breakfast dishes with a scowl on his face that would have driven the purr out of a peace conference. The arrangement that had been concluded behind his back was doubly distasteful to him. In the first place, he particularly wanted to teach the McGregor boys, who could well afford the knowledge, how to play poker patience. Secondly, the Bastable catering was of the kind that is classified as rude plenty, which Clovis translated as plenty that gives rise to rude remarks. Watching him from behind ostentatiously sleepy lids, his mother realized, in the light of long experience, that any rejoicing over the success of her maneuver would be distinctly premature. It was one thing to fit Clovis into a convenient niche of the domestic jigsaw puzzle. It was quite another matter to get him to stay there. Lady Bastable always liked to retire in state to the morning room immediately after breakfast and spend a quiet hour in skimming through the papers. They were there, so she might as well get her money's worth out of them. Politics did not greatly interest her, but she was obsessed with a favorite foreboding that one of these days would be a great social upheaval in which everybody would be killed by everybody else. "It will come sooner than we think," she would observe darkly. A mathematical expert of exceptionally high powers would have been puzzled to work out the approximate date from the slender and confusing groundwork which this assertion afforded. On this particular morning, the sight of Lady Bastable enthroned among her papers gave Clovis the hint towards which his mind had been groping all breakfast time. His mother had gone upstairs to supervise packing operations, and he was alone on the ground floor with his hostess and the servants. The latter were key to the situation. Bursting wildly into the kitchen quarters, Clovis screamed a frantic, though strictly non-committal summons. "Poor Lady Bastable! In the morning room! Oh, quick, quick!" The next moment, the butler, cook, page boy, 2 or 3 maids, and a gardener who had happened to be in one of the outer kitchens were following in a hot scurry after Clovis as he headed back for the morning room. Lady Bastable was roused from the world of newspaper lore by hearing a Japanese screen in the hall go down with a crash. Then the door leading from the hall flew open, and her young guest tore madly through the room, shrieked at her in passing, "The Jacquerie!" and "They're on us!" and dashed like an escaping hawk out through the French window. Well, a scared mob of servants burst in on his heels, the gardener still clutching the sickle which he had been trimming the hedges with, and the impetus of their headlong haste carried them slipping and sliding over the smooth parquet flooring toward the chair where their mistress sat in panic-stricken amazement. If she had had a moment granted her for reflection, she would have behaved, as she afterward explained, with considerable dignity. It was probably the sickle which decided her, but anyway, she followed the lead that Clovis had given her through the French window and ran well and far across the lawn before the eyes of her astonished retainers. Lost dignity is not a possession which can be restored at a moment's notice, and both Lady Bastable and the butler found the process of returning to normal conditions almost as painful as a slow recovery from drowning. A Jacquerie, even if carried out with the most respectful of intentions, cannot fail to leave some traces of embarrassment behind it. A Jacquerie, for those that are not looking up the footnotes in real time, a Jacquerie is sort of like a peasant uprising, but primarily, if not entirely, consisting of one's own servants. Not a mutiny, but an uprising of the house servants. Therefore, a Jacquerie, even if carried out with the most respectful of intentions, cannot fail to leave some traces of embarrassment behind it. By lunchtime, however, Decorum had reasserted itself with enhanced vigor as a natural rebound from its recent overthrow, and the meal was served in a frigid stateliness that might have been framed on a Byzantine model. Halfway through its duration, Mrs. Sangrail was solemnly presented with an envelope lying on a silver platter. It contained a check for 49 shillings. The McGregor boys learned how to play poker patience after all. They could afford to. Indeed, the sickle decided her. Well, we shall interject one more brief poem by Khalil Gibran before we move on to another story in an entirely separate part of the world. This is Defeat by Khalil Gibran. Defeat. My defeat. My solitude and my aloofness. You are dearer to me than 1,000 triumphs and sweeter to my heart than all world glory. Defeat, my self-knowledge and my defiance. Through you, I know that I am yet young and swift of foot, and not to be trapped by withering laurels, and in you I have found aloneness and the joy of being shunned and scorned. Defeat, my shining sword and shield, in your eyes I have read that to be enthroned is to be enslaved, and to be understood is to be leveled down, and to be grasped is but to reach one's fullness, and like a ripe fruit, to fall and be consumed. Defeat, my bold companion, you shall hear my songs and my cries and my silences, but none but you shall speak to me of the beating of wings and the urging of seas and of mountains that burn in the night, and you alone shall climb my steep and rocky soul. Defeat, my deathless courage, you and I shall laugh together with the storm, and together we shall dig graves for all that die in us. And we shall stand in the sun with a will, and we shall be dangerous. I love that one for the end. We shall stand in the sun with a will, and we shall be dangerous. That is, yeah. Welcome, Miss Lily L. So, we shall move on to the short story that is the main event of the evening as soon as I refill my tea. Those listening to the audio podcast will be none the wiser. Hello, Arpegia. You made it just in time for the beginning of tonight's main feature. And hello, Cynthia. And Lily, if this is your first time joining us, I welcome wholeheartedly. So tonight's last story is by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. She lived from 1852. She died right before the Great Depression, or right at the beginning of the Great Depression. She died in 1930. So, thank you, Aaron. I did indeed need a little honey with that tea. I love this story. This is just deliciously sweet and charming. This is How Fidelia Went to the Store by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. "I don't know what we're gonna do," said Aunt Maria Crooker. She sat in a large armchair and held in her lap a bowl of sugar and butter that she was creaming. Aunt Maria filled up the chair from arm to arm, for she was very portly. She had a large, rosy, handsome face, and she creamed with such energy that she panted for breath. "Well, I don't know either," rejoined her sister, Mrs. Lennox. "I can't go to the store with my lame foot, that's certain." "Well, I know I can't," said Aunt Maria with an additional emphasis. "I haven't walked 2 miles for 10 years, and I don't believe I should get to that store and back to save my life." "I don't believe you could either. I don't know what's going to be done. We can't make the cake without raisins anyhow. It's the queerest thing how Father happened to forget those raisins. Now, here he is done gone over to East Dighton after the new cow, and Cynthia gone to Keene to buy her bonnet, and me with a scalded foot, and you not able to walk, and not one raisin in the house to put into that wedding cake." Well, Mrs. Lennox stated the case in full with a despairing eloquence, and Aunt Maria sighed and wrinkled her forehead. "If there were only any neighbors you could borrow from," she observed. "Well, there ain't any neighbors twixt here and the store except the Allens and the Simmonses, and the Allens are so tight they never put raisins into their Thanksgiving pies. And Mrs. Allen, she told me they didn't. She said she thought most folks made their pies way too rich, and her folks liked them just as well without raisins. As for the Simmonses, I don't believe they've seen a raisin from one year's end to the other. They're lucky if they can get enough common things to eat for all those children. I don't know what's going to be done. Here's the dressmaker coming tomorrow, and Cynthia going to be married in 2 weeks, and the cake ought to be made today if ever it's going to be." "Yes, it had," assented Aunt Maria. "We put it off full long enough anyway. Wedding cake ain't near so good unless it stands a little while. Don't I know it?" Just then, there was this shrill, prolonged squeak. It came from the yard. The doors and the windows were open. It was a very warm day. "What's that?" cried Aunt Maria. "Oh, it's nothing but Fidelia's little wagon. She's dragging it outside round the yard." The two women, they looked at each other. It was as if a simultaneous idea had suddenly come to the both of them. Aunt Maria gave expression to it first. "Fidelia couldn't go, could she?" Could she? Maria Crooker, that little thing, she ain't 6 years old, and she ain't never been nowhere alone. You suppose I'm going to send her a mile to that store? Mrs. Lennox's tone was full of vehement indignation, but her eyes still met Aunt Maria's with that doubtful and reflective expression. I don't see a mite of harm in it, Aunt Maria maintained sturdily. She set her bowl of sugar and butter on the table and leaned forward with a hand on each apron knee. I know Fidelia ain't but 5-year-old, but she brighter than some children of 7. And it's just a straight road to the store. And she can't get lost to save her life. And she knows where it is. You took her down to Miss Rose 3 or 4 weeks ago, didn't you? Yeah, that day Father went down for grain. I suppose she would remember. Of course she would remember. I don't see one thing, as far as I'm concerned, to hinder that child going down to the store and bringing us home some raisins. I used to go on errands before I was as old as she is. Folks didn't fuss over their children so much in my day. Well, said Miss Lennox finally with a great sigh, I don't know, but I may as well send her. Mrs. Lennox was much smaller than her sister, and she had a rather sickly but pleasant face. She had to push a chair before her as she walked, for she had scalded her foot quite badly the week before, and now it was all swathed in bandages. It had been a very unfortunate accident in more ways than one for Cynthia. Her elder daughter was going to be married soon, and the family was busily engaged in the wedding preparations. It was very hard for poor Mrs. Lennox to have to limp about with one knee in a chair while she made wedding cake and arranged for the bridal festivities, but she made the best of it. Now she pushed over to the door and called, Fidelia! Fidelia! Directly, the squeak increased to an agonizing degree. The rattle of small wheels accompanied it, and Fidelia came trudging around the corner of the house. She was a chubby little girl, and her blue tear seemed rather tight for her. She had a round, rosy face and an innocent and honest black eyes. She wore a small shaker bonnet with a green cape, and she stubbed her toes into the grass with every step she took. Don't stub your toes so, girl, said her mother admonishingly. You'll wear all your shoes all out. Fidelia immediately advanced with soft pats, like a kitten. When she got into the kitchen, her mother took off her shaker bonnet and looked at her critically. You'll have to have your hair brushed, said she. Fidelia, do you remember how you went with Mother down to Miss Rose's 3, maybe 4 weeks ago? Fidelia nodded and winked. There was a big pussycat there. You remember? He was huge and gray, kind of scary looking, except for how he purr and lick your hand. And Miss Rose gave you a cookie. Fidelia's affirmative wink seemed to give out sparkles, especially about the kitty cat. Well, you remember how we went to the side door and knocked with some roses over the top of it, and Miss Rose, she came to that side door. Remember all this? Fidelia, intensely attentive, standing before her mother and Aunt Maria, remembered about the side door. Well, you remember how there was a piazza across the front of the house, don't you? Father hitched the horse to a post there. Well, there's another door there opening onto the piazza. Don't you remember? A door with panes of glass in it like a window. Fidelia, she shook her head. She nodded. She did indeed remember. Well, now, Fidelia, do you suppose you can go down to the store, buy some raisins for your mother to put in Sister Cynthia's wedding cake all by yourself? And be a real smart little girl, put in Aunt Maria. Fidelia gave one ecstatic roll of her sweet black eyes at them, and she broke out into a shout, "Let me go! Let me go! Let me go!" She oscillated on her small stubbed toes like a bird preparing to fly, and she tugged energetically at her mother's apron. "I'll give you a penny, and you can buy yourself a nice stick of red and white twisted candy," added her mother. Fidelia actually made a little dash for the door then, but her mother caught her up. "Stop," she said in an admonishing voice, which was quieting to Fidelia and made her realize that the red and white candy was still in the future. "Now, you just wait a minute, child. Not be in such a hurry. You ain't going this way with your apron just as dirty as poison and your hair all in a snarl. No. You gotta have on your clean apron. And you gotta have your hair brushed and your face gotta be washed." So, Fidelia climbed obediently into her high chair and sat with her eyes screwed up and her fists clenched while her mother polished her face faithfully with a wet, soapy end of a towel and combed the snarls out of her hair. When it was all done, her cheeks being very red and shiny and her hair very damp and smooth when she was arrayed in her clean, starched white tier, and she had her shaker bonnet tied on with an emphatic square bow, she stood in the door and she drank in the parting instructions. Her eyes were wide and intent. Her mouth drooped soberly at the corners. The importance of the occasion had begun to impress her. She held a penny tight in her hand. The raisins were to be charged, it not being judged advisable to trust Fidelia with so much money. "I don't believe that little thing can carry 3 pounds of raisins," Mrs. Lennox said to Aunt Maria. She was becoming more and more uneasy about Fidelia's going. "Well, let her take her little wagon and drag 'em. That'll be just the thing," said Aunt Maria complacently. So Fidelia started down the road, trundling behind her the little squeaking cart. It was a warm July day, and it was very dusty. Directly when Fidelia started, she forgot her mother's injunction about stubbing her toes. She disappeared in a small cloud of dust, for she walked in the middle of the road and flirted it up with a great delight. In the course of the mile, Fidelia met one horse team. It was an old rocking chaise and a white horse, and an old farmer was driving. He drove slower when he came alongside of Fidelia. When he had fairly passed her, he stopped entirely, twisted about in his seat, raised his voice. "Oh, now, whose little gal are you?" he asked. Fidelia was a little frightened. Instead of giving her father's name, she gave her own with shy precision. "Fidelia Ames Lennox," she said, retiring into her little shaker bonnet. "Now, you ain't over here being running away now, be you?" Fidelia's pride was touched. "I'm going to the store for my mother," she announced in quite a shrill tone. Then she took to her heels, and the little wagon trundled after with a wilder squeak than ever. Fidelia kept saying over to herself, "3 pounds of your best raisins, and Mr. Lennox will come in and pay you. 3 pounds of your best raisins, and Mr. Lennox will come in and pay you. 3 pounds." Her mother and Aunt Maria wished after she had gone that they had written it out on a piece of paper, but they hadn't thought of that. But Aunt Maria said she knew that such a bright child as Fidelia would remember 3 pounds of raisins when she had been told over and over and charged not to come home without them. Fidelia had started about 10 o'clock in the morning, and her mother and Aunt Maria had agreed that they would not worry if she should not return until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That would allow more than an hour for the mile walk each way, give plenty of time for a rest between, for Fidelia had been instructed to go into the stall and sit down on a stool and rest a while before starting upon her return trip. Likely as not, Miss Rose will give her a cookie or something, Aunt Maria had whispered to Miss Lennox. So, when noon came, the two women pictured Fidelia sitting, perched on a little stool in the stall, being fed with candy and cookies and made much of, maybe even eating dinner with the Rose family and petting their huge gray beast cat happily. Mrs. Rose made so much of her when you took her there before that I shouldn't wonder a mite if she'd keep her for dinner, said Aunt Maria. She promulgated this theory more strenuously when 1 o'clock came and Fidelia had not appeared. Of course that's what it is, she kept repeating. It'd take him a good hour to eat dinner all together. I shouldn't be a bit surprised if she didn't get here before 2 o'clock. I think you're dreadful silly to worry, Jane. For poor Mrs. Lennox was pushing her chair every few minutes over to the door where she would stand, her face all one anxious frown, straining her eyes for a glimpse of the small figure trudging up the road. She had made the blueberry dumpling that Fidelia loved for dinner, and it was keeping warm on the back of the stove. Neither she nor Aunt Maria had eaten so much as a mouthful. When 2 o'clock came, Mrs. Lennox broke down entirely. Oh dear, she wailed, doing that ugly sobbing cry. Oh dear, I ought to have known better than to let her go. Aunt Maria was now pacing heavily between her chair and the door, but she still maintained a brave front. For goodness sake, Jane, don't give up so, says she. I don't see anything to worry about. For my part, they're just keeping her for dinner. At 2:30, Mrs. Lennox stood up with a determined air. I ain't going to wait here another minute, says she. I'm going to find her. I don't know, but she's fell into the brook or she got run over, eaten by that Wolfgang, something. Mrs. Lennox's face was all drawn up with anxiety. I'd like to know how you're going, said Aunt Maria. I guess I can push this chair along the road just as well as in a room. Pretty looking sight you'll be going a mile with one knee in a wooden chair. I guess I don't care much how I look if only I find her. Miss Lennox's voice broke into a long wail now. You just sit down and keep calm, said Aunt Maria. If anybody's going, I am. Oh, you can't. Yes, I can too. I can't. I ain't quite so far gone that I can't walk a mile. You ain't gonna step on that scald foot and get all laid up with that wedding coming off. Not if I know it. I'm just gonna slip on my gator shoes and my sunbonnet and take the big green umbrella to keep the sun off. Well, when Aunt Maria was equipped and started, Mrs. Lennox watched her progress down the road with frantic impatience. It seemed to her that she could have gone faster with her chair. Truth was, poor Aunt Maria, plodding heavily along in her gaiter shoes, holding the green umbrella over her flaming face, she made slow and painful progress. And it was well that Mr. Lennox and Cynthia Lennox came home 2 hours before they were expected. It was 3 o'clock when Mr. Lennox came driving into the yard with the open buggy, Cynthia, erect and blooming, with her big hat box in her lap, sat beside him, and the New Jersey cow, fastened by a rope to the tail of the buggy, came on behind with melancholy moos. Cynthia had bought her wedding bonnet sooner than she expected, so she had come home on the 3 o'clock train instead of the 5, and her father had bought the cow sooner than he expected, and had come to the railroad crossing just about that time that Cynthia's train arrived. So he had stopped and taken in her and her hat box, and they had all ridden home together. Well, Mrs. Lennox stood in the kitchen door when they drove in. "Oh, Mother," Cynthia cried out, "I've had splendid luck. I got the handsomest wedding bonnet." "I guess you won't care, child, much about bonnets," answered her mother. "Fidelia's lost." She spoke calmly and slowly. Then she began to weep wildly and just lament. It was quite a time before she could make the case plain to them. And Cynthia and her hat box and Mr. Lennox and the horse and the buggy and cow all remained before her in a petrified halt. Soon as Mr. Lennox fairly understood, he sprang out of the buggy, untied the cow, led her into the barn, turned the team around with a sharp grate of the wheels, jumped in again, and gathered up the reins. Cynthia, her rosy cheeks quite pale, still sat in her place, and the tears splashed on her new hat box cover. Mrs. Lennox had set her chair outside the door and followed it with a painful effort. "Stop, Father," she cried. "I'm going too." "Oh, Mother, you can't," said Mr. Lennox and Cynthia together. "I'm going. You needn't say a word. Father, you get out and you help me in there." Well, Mr. Lennox got out and lifted while Cynthia pulled. Mrs. Lennox's injured foot suffered, but she set her mouth hard and she said nothing. They started at a good pace, 3 on a seat, with Mr. Lennox in the middle. He was driving. They got about halfway to the stall when they overtook Aunt Maria. Aunt Maria, with the green umbrella overhead, was proceeding steadily, with a sideways motion that seemed more effective than the forward one. "I'll get out and let her get in," said Cynthia. "No," said her father, "it won't do. It'll break the springs. We can't ride 3 on a seat with Aunt Maria anyhow, and I gotta drive." So they passed Aunt Maria. "Don't go any farther, Aunt Maria," Cynthia called out sobbingly over her shoulder back to her. "You just sit down there on the wall and you rest." But Aunt Maria shook her head. She could not speak, but she kept on. It was 3:15 when they reached the Rose house and the stall. The stall was in the front of the house, and the Rose family occupied the rear portion. The house stood on this little street corner, so a good deal of it was visible, and the whole establishment had this shut-up air. Not a single farmer's wagon stood in front of the stall. However, as Mr. Lennox drove up, a woman's head appeared at a window. Then a side door opened, and she stood there. She had on a big apron, and her face was flushed as if she had been over the stove. She held a great wooden spoon, too. She began talking to the Lennoxes, but they paid no attention to her. Their eyes were riveted upon the stall door. There was a speck of white against its dark front, and suddenly it moved. It was Fidelia's white pinafore. "Wow, there's Fidelia!" gasped Cynthia. She jumped out, not waiting for her father to turn the wheel, and ran to the stall front door. The hat box rolled out and the lid came off, and there was her wedding bonnet right out in the dust in front of God and everybody. But she didn't mind that. She caught Fidelia. "Oh, you naughty little girl, where you been all this time?" she cried. Fidelia's eyes took on a bewildered stare. Her mouth puckered more and more. She clung to her sister and she sobbed something that was quite inaudible. It was quite a time for her father and mother and Cynthia and Mrs. Rose, surrounding her with attention, could gather the import of it all was that she had knocked and knocked, and nobody had come to the door. "You knocked?" gasped Mrs. Rose. "Why, the poor little lamb! Here, Mr. Rose and Sam have been away all day, and I've been making currant jelly out in the kitchen. And there's the little bell on the counter the customers always ring when there ain't nobody around. I've been listening for that all day. It's been so hot, everybody's been out making hay, and I don't suppose a soul has been near the store since 9 o'clock this morning. And she stood there and knocked. I never heard of anything like that in my life. See here, sweetie, haven't you been asleep?" Fidelia shook her head in a sulky and downcast manner, but there was a suspiciously flushed look about her, and they agreed it was more than probable that a nap on the store steps had softened and shortened her raisin vigil. Well, Mrs. Lennox had her up in the wagon on her lap. She took her shaky bonnet off and smoothed her hair and kissed her. "She thought she'd go knock, I suppose," said she. "I ought to have told her she didn't have to when she went to the store. Poor little soul. Mother won't send her to the store again till she's bigger." "I knocked and I knocked," wailed Fidelia just piteously. She looked cross and worn out. Mrs. Rose ran into the house and brought out a plate of cookies and a mug of milk. Then Fidelia sat in her mother's lap and ate and drank and felt comforted. But after the raisins had been finally purchased, Cynthia's bonnet picked up out of the dust and shaken off, the little squeaking wagon stowed under the seat of the buggy, and the horse team turned around, Fidelia set up a grievous and injured cry. My candy! I ain't got my candy!" And she held up to view the little copper cent still clutched in her moist little fist. "Oh, that poor little lamb, she shall have a candy," cried Mrs. Rose. Fidelia had never seen such a handful of candy as Mrs. Rose brought out from the store. There was a twisted red and white stick of peppermint, pink checkerberry, clear barley, a stick of every kind in the glass jars of Mr. Rose's store window. And Mrs. Rose would not take Fidelia's 1 penny at all. She bade her keep it until she came back to the store again. Aunt Maria was almost up to the store by the time they left it, and it was decided she should remain and make a call upon Mrs. Rose while Mr. Lennox carried the others home. Then he would return for her. Aunt Maria folded her green umbrella, sank down on the doorstep, and Mrs. Rose brought her a palm leaf fan and a glass of ginger water. "I ain't walked a mile for 10 years, gasped Aunt Maria. "But I'm so thankful that child's safe that I can't think of anything else." There were tears in her eyes as she watched the wagon load disappearing under the green branches of the elm trees, and Fidelia, in her mother's lap, rode along and sucked a stick of barley candy in silent bliss. Griefs in childhood soon turned to memories. Straight away she sucked her barley candy. Fidelia's long and painful vigil at the stall became a thing of the past. Well, this concludes this evening's Fireside Tales with Wolfgang. I see Michelle Hoover is with us. Hi, Michelle. Michelle is going to edit this and put it out onto another YouTube channel as well as the cable access stations. So, this concludes tonight's Fireside Tales with Wolfgang. Thank you so much for joining us all. And I will see you all again on Thursday night at 6 o'clock for the next Lovecast. Thank you. Be well. Good night.